They say the creek behind my house only rises once every 20 years. But let me tell you, I've lived here for 15 and I've seen it rise 5 times, which is about all you need to know about how seriously my neighbors take flood risk, or maybe how much they don't. My name's Malcolm Fry. I'm 67, retired hydrologist, and the last guy you want to ignore when water starts whispering its warnings through the soil, the way it did that week in June. You know how sometimes you can just feel in your bones that nobody's paying attention but you? Yeah, that was me. Out there with my boots, my thermos of coffee, and my old Army Corps notebook, watching the creek chew away at the western bank, right where the HOA had just set up Camp Sunrise for the neighborhood kids. 25 tents and a mess of picnic benches placed exactly where floods have always wanted to go. I did what I always do. Measured, logged, took photos, wrote the first of 2 mini emails to the HOA. Subject: urgent creek bank saturation and erosion risk. I told them, as gently as I could, that they were risking everything by building on the floodplain, but you already know how that went. Crickets. By nightfall, rain was falling polite and steady, the kind that fools you into thinking you've got time. But water is patient, you know? It doesn't argue, it just waits. And then one day it takes everything. By morning, I saw Chad Bennett, young guy, vice president, son of the board president, laughing it up out by the tents with his buddy Jim. I tried to warn them, again, about hydrodynamics, saturated soil, channel encroachment, but they just grinned and told me to relax, that the kids needed their camp, that I was making a fuss over nothing. I kept my cool, took more pictures, filmed the creek gnawing at the roots, and fired off a second email, this time CC'd to the city's flood control office, just to cover my bases. Colleen, the HOA president, Chad's mom, shot back a single line. "Thank you for your input, Mr. Fry. We have it under control." Famous last words, right? You'd think dread would show up loud, but it comes quiet. Frogs stopped singing. The robins disappeared. I paced my yard with a flashlight that night, already knowing the water's path, straight through my garden, down to the camp. Next morning, I planted a yardstick in the creek mud, marked the water level with red tape, and emailed a third and final warning. Evacuate the camp today. This is not a drill. They ignored me. But the next morning, parents dropped off their kids, staff set up games, the rain picked up again, and I stood at my fence watching it all, feeling the kind of grief you only get when you already know how the story ends. Now, here's where things took a turn. Jessa, the camp coordinator, young, good-hearted, with more optimism than experience, came over, clipboard in hand. I told her, point blank, "You need to move the kids now." She hesitated, but Chad swooped in, all confidence and bravado, insisting it was fine, that the sandbags would hold, that I was overreacting. He even told me if I cared so much I should have run for the board. You ever get that feeling like you're shouting into the wind? That was me. I walked away, but not before I caught sight of news crews rolling up for a feel-good segment on the summer camp, Colleen giving interviews like everything was perfect. I spent the rest of that afternoon compiling evidence, maps, reports, screenshots, delivered it all, 3 copies, one to myself, one to the town's risk management, one to the clubhouse. That night, the storm got real. Lightning, thunder, and in my chest, a certainty colder than rain. Maybe it was just data. Maybe it was Riley, my daughter, lost in a flood years ago, the memory biting at me every time the creek rose. I couldn't sleep. I walked out at 2 in the morning and saw the water had left the bank, slipping silently toward the camp. That's when instinct took over. I cut across my garden, slipped past the fence, shouting for help. No answer. Only a little girl, maybe 10, clutching a ladybug flashlight, pointed me to the counselors. I found Jessa and Cody asleep, told them the truth. "You've got less than 2 hours, move everyone now." To her credit, Jessa jumped into action, radioed the staff, started waking the kids at 2:48 a.m. The evacuation started. Half awake kids clutching blankets, counselors guiding them toward the tennis courts. And that's when the real twist hit. Chad, stumbling out, angry and in denial, yelling at me right up to the moment the creek breached for real. Water roared in, took out the craft station, the canopies, And suddenly Chad went from bored vice president to just another guy in the dark, staring down something way bigger than himself. I didn't have time to argue. I shoved him toward higher ground and ran for the tents, spotted a little boy still zipped inside, and waded through chest-high water to haul him out. The flood took everything. Campsite gone, field underwater, police and fire trucks lighting up the street, parents panicking, Colleen arriving in a bathrobe demanding answers. I just pointed at the destruction and told her, "This is what happens when warnings are ignored." News crews started filming, neighbors gathered, and finally, people started listening. After the storm, the silence was heavy, like the whole town was waiting to see what would come next. The HOA sent out a PR statement, called it unprecedented, said nothing about the ignored warnings. Jim, the treasurer, looked me in the eye and finally admitted they'd messed up, that it was easier to go along than stand alone. I submitted everything to the city, and by the end of the week, there was a formal investigation and a letter of commendation from the city in my mailbox. Jessa texted me, thanked me for saving the kids, and for the first time in years, I felt like I'd done right by Riley. Maybe even started to forgive myself. Of course, the HOA tried to play tough. Sent me a letter threatening citations for unauthorized presence on HOA property. I smiled. Let them try. I'd already faced worse than paperwork. But the investigation stuck. Colleen resigned. Chad vanished from the board. Jessa got a new job with the city. They asked me to serve on the new Creek Safety Committee, and this time, I said yes. Things didn't change overnight. There were flyers and mailboxes calling me a troublemaker. Some neighbors still mad their community spirit had been bruised, but most started seeing me as more than the crazy creek guy. Kids showed up at my house, wanting to learn about water, asking real questions, and I taught them everything I knew. The creek became more than a problem. It became a classroom, and maybe a kind of memorial, too. When the court date came, the evidence was overwhelming. The HOA was found liable for willful negligence. They were forced to pay damages, fund new flood mitigation, and, most importantly, apologize. The apology landed in every mailbox. We apologize for dismissing the expertise and concern of Mr. Malcolm Fry, whose warnings saved lives. People started thanking me in the grocery store, bringing pies to my door, and, yeah, a few still grumbled. But for once, the creek's lesson stuck. The kids started calling me the Creek Man. We built models, ran experiments, watched the water together, and every Thursday I'd host what they called Creek Class under the trees. The city asked me to be a permanent advisor. I declined the title, but I stayed involved, boots on, notebook in hand. Some scars never heal. I still think of Riley, still listen for warnings in the water. But sometimes, late at night, I walk out to the creek and sit on the bench they built in my honor. I listen, not for danger, but for peace. The frogs are back. The kids laugh by the water. The neighborhood remembers now, and so do I. Maybe, in the end, the best justice isn't punishment or payback, but being impossible to ignore. Teaching the next generation to listen before the water rises again. So, let me ask you, when someone rings the bell, when the warning signs come, will you listen? Or will you wait for the flood to teach you the hard way? I want to hear what you think about risk, about responsibility, about the power of speaking up when it matters. Drop your thoughts below. Let's talk about where real change begins.